Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, and you would think that would make it a very sedate and boring thing, fit only for the dyed-in-the-wool book fanatics that we have here on BookTube. But there's suddenly an element of drama invested in the Daily Penguin, since I mentioned yesterday that I am now seized with the urge to rethink the books in this room, to increase the number, and also to change the number and to move a bunch of key books, a couple of hundred key books from the rest of Hyde Cottage into this room, so that this room represents the core book collection, not just the one, well, actually, yes, the ones that I love the most. That's supposed to be the books in this room. There are 1,000 books elsewhere, and I go through them, I look at them regularly. But not all of them. And is there a way for me to represent all of those books in here? And naturally, when I start to think that way, naturally, my eye falls on the Penguin wall. A whole wall of Penguin classics. Lots of duplication, lots of weakest links, lots of volumes that I might like to have because they are Penguin classic, but I don't go back to them. I don't revisit them. And you look up there, you'll see Penguin Classic hardcover editions. Maybe you see Penguin Classic hardcover science fiction and fantasy volumes, a volume of Dune, or Once and Future King, or Stranger in a Strange Land, for which I have editions that I prefer. Do those need to be there just because they're Penguin Classics? I don't know. I mentioned yesterday that if I could maybe shrink the Penguin Classic wall to just this middle bookcase and clear up 2 whole bookcases full of space, that I'd be well on my way to being able to shrink my printed book collection to what will fit in this room. Oh, it should be great. It would be absolutely great. But that caused howls of outrage from people saying, no, don't touch the Penguin wall. Mark Richardson Reeves even went so far as to start a hashtag on Instagram. Who knew he even knew what Instagram was, let alone a hashtag? And yet, so those of you who may be coming to this video relieved that there's not just a drop cloth back there, I am thinking about this room just in general. I'm not centering in on the Penguin Classic wall. But today's book is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So we might as well talk about it just a bit, maybe in those terms. In other words, in other terms as well, of course, this is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And we've already seen Dickens. We did a video with a bunch of his books, including this one, in the Black Spine Ordinary Penguin Classics that fill that wall. This is the Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition, with artwork by Tom Haugemat. That has, there you have Pip in the graveyard, so that this opens out to one big scene. There's Pip encountering the convict in the graveyard, the famous scene, and then you've got the French flaps have pictorial scenes, famous scenes from the book. I think that happens on the back as well. Yes, that happens on the back as well. This is a new introduction by Tanya Agathoclogius. Not a name I know, obviously. That goes through the basics, if I remember correctly, goes through the basics of this book. It came out as a book in, I think, 1861, having been serialized first. It was heavily bought into and promoted by Moody's Lending Library, and also got a fairly soft critical reception in its day. It was late in Dickens' career, but it reminded a lot of people of David Copperfield. And a lot of the critics who gave it a soft landing said, well, you have listened to your fans. Your readers and fans have been saying for years that they would like you to return to the lighthearted humor of your earlier works, and this book largely does that. It wasn't universal praise, and I believe this edition makes the point that other editions of Great Expectations have made, which is that it didn't really become the Dickens. It didn't really become the ultimate Victorian novel until the 20th century, the mid-20th century, when it started to become a favorite of cinematic adaptations. I don't know how much truth in that there was. This was a very popular novel in its day. And along with David Copperfield, it is the most Dickensian of Dickens books. So if you're not going to like Dickens, if you don't get along with this author, you don't click with his artistic vision, these are the books that are going to show it to you. It's one thing entirely for you to like Le Vendée by Anthony Trollope. But if you don't like Barchester Towers, then you're not on the same wavelength as Anthony Trollope. Simple as that. And although that's not true for me with Trollope, it's always been true for me with Dickens. I like A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities is not normal Dickens. It's the equivalent of liking, Trollope's historical novel. Otherwise, I haven't got this author. As I mentioned when we did our big shelf full of Charles Dickens earlier in this Penguin tour, otherwise I don't get along with this author. I like him fine. I've read his books. I know them. I recognize the long shadows of illusion that they cast on the rest of literature, but I don't love them in the way that I'm clearly supposed to. And I think part of the reason why I don't is because it's pretty clear that the first and foremost person who expects me to love these books is Charles Dickens. And I don't like that. I just don't like that. Maybe it's the critic in me. But I don't like it when the author is sitting there rubbing his hands together, eagerly waiting for you to smile at the really good part that he knows you're right up to. That bugs me. Authors might do that. All of them might do that internally. But if they do it so openly as Dickens does, it bothers me. This is also full of hysterical exaggerations, hysterical archetypes of a type that made this author's career, and that I guess there was a large reading audience in the 1860s and 1850s and 1870s that liked that sort of thing. To me, it's always seemed a little browbeating. It's the aspect of Trollope that I like the least. One of the few aspects of Trollope that carries over that tradition into his own works is the names. There are a lot of names in Trollope that are very Dickensian, very give away the game, I'm not taking this completely seriously. This is mainly meant to be a Bunyan-esque allegory. I could sense Trollope, when I read him, I think he was moving away further and further from that, and that if he'd been able to change all of that retroactively and late in his career, he'd probably have done it. But one way or another, Dickens was married to it, invented it, popularized it, and was married to it. So there's an archness to this author that I don't like, that just prevents me from loving him. Which I don't mean to stir up controversy any more than I already have, but this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about getting rid of my Penguin wall. I'm talking about bringing it under control so that maybe it's not 3 whole bookcases. This is totally unnecessary. It's a very pretty volume with the deckled edges and the French fraps, but I do not need a Penguin Classic Deluxe edition of this author, of all authors. I don't. There's a strong argument to be made that I don't need a whole shelf of Dickens either in Penguin Classic. This is an author that I don't love. I never go back to his work on a regular basis, never. And that's what this room is supposed to be. Penguins are not. That's what every book in this room is supposed to be. So this is a good example. Of course, I recommend it if you really like these Penguin Classic Deluxe editions. They are lovely, lovely things. Largely lovely things. So I'm sure that there's somebody out there who has a whole collection of these, a complete collection of them. I sometimes wish that I did, but that is to be cautioned against. I caution myself against that kind of thinking, because that's aesthetic thinking. And there might be people who collect books for aesthetic reasons, but I'm not one of them. I'm not. And I don't want to be. It's so tempting. So this not only makes me think, well, okay, we can hold up the Penguin Classic Deluxe edition of Great Expectations and talk about it a bit for the Daily Penguin, but I shouldn't own it. It not only makes me think that, but it goes further and makes me think, well, in addition to that, I probably shouldn't own any Dickens. I have some of those hardcover classics are Dickens. I have mass market paperbacks in Penguin of Dickens, both with black spine and with the old orange spine. And I have, as you saw, a whole shelf of trade paperback black spine Penguin Classic Charles Dickens. It's not like I'm ever going to lack for the ability to read this author. All of his works are on Project Gutenberg. I have all of his works on every electronic device that I have, and can get them free of cost at any time. So it's not like I need decorative editions of an author that I'm just not clicking with. That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. If that happened, if that same consideration happened 100 times, say, for the Penguin Classic wall, 100 different times, I've already mentioned a handful just in this video. I do not need a Penguin Classic hardcover edition of Dune with a boring cover and no internal illustrations and a little bit dodgy binding. I don't need that just because it's Penguin Classic. If I were to find 100 examples of that on this wall, well, then even if I don't free up bookcases, I would still make this wall far better controlled. That has been my goal from the beginning of the Daily Penguin, so this is just an illustration of that. But at least it has the benefit of furthering Victober, right? Victober is a great old booktube tradition where you concentrate on the literature of the Victorian period, and it still has a good week of life left in it. So I try not to plan ahead my Penguin Classics, but I haven't until now, but we're all the way at the end of the year, and we're not going to finish this wall before we finish the year. So maybe a little planning is in order for this coming week. I may not do a Daily Penguin tomorrow, but maybe a little planning is in order from now on. Not so much to prune and censor, but to go along with BookTube events. Maybe for the rest of October, it should be all Victorian books. And maybe for all of November, it should be nonfiction. Nonfiction November, a 5-year-old BookTube event, takes place in November, where we concentrate on nonfiction, where we try to read a lot more of it and shake the stigma off it that it so unjustly has in all of the reading world, including BookTube. Maybe that's worth doing. Maybe all of November, our Penguin should be nonfiction. That might be fun. But one way or another, I'm going to wrap this Penguin up for now with the Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition of Great Expectations. If you are looking for, in terms of the Penguin Classic Recommend section of your video, if you've never read any Charles Dickens, and you're not predisposed to love him, you don't have any skin in the game, you're just wondering what he is, I would suggest reading either David Copperfield or Great Expectations, or both, rather than the huge and far more somber and dramatic works that tend to be studied by him. I would read these two quintessentially Dickensian works. If they don't work on you, it's possible that this author won't work on you at all. So if you're wondering, that at least to that extent, I can make a recommend here. This is terrible, scandalous. The reason that I'm looking so dodgy is because it's such a scandalous thing to do, to make a video about Charles Dickens' Great Expectation in the middle of October and not be raving over the moon, and yet I'm not. But we'll wrap it up now, and we'll see if we fare better tomorrow or Monday. Thank you, BookTube.